Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to welcome you all to today's discussion. Geothermal's heating up almost as fast as the Texas summer, and I was joking earlier that geothermal is so hot that it can make oil blush, which I always think is cheeky. We're in the very early phases of President Trump's new term, and he's made it very clear that energy independence and unleashing American energy is a top priority to his administration this time. And he even went as far as declaring a national energy emergency with including geothermal into that. And so I'm looking really forward just to talking to these panelists today and everybody tuning in, and just let's dig deep and dig down. I'd like to go ahead and introduce my panelists with me. At the far end is Mary Lou Hastings with the Mitchell Foundation. I have Colin Ledden from the Environmental Defense Fund. My partner in crime here, Matt Welch with the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. And then Dr. Ken Wizian with a geophysicist from the University of Texas. Mary Lou, I'd like to kick it off with you first. You're the executive vice president of the Mitchell Foundation, and Mr. Mitchell played a key role in the shale boom, and the Mitchell Foundation is one of the leading environmental think tanks in Texas. The foundation funded a report that outlines the future of geothermal energy in Texas, and what strategic goals was that foundation trying to achieve by advancing that in the funding of that project and the study?
Thank you all very much. Thanks to the all of the geothermal experts out there and your enthusiasm and support for the science and technology and development of this resource. I can give credit to the famous Drew Nelson for his foresight at the Mitchell Foundation. So a few years ago, Drew, for several years, was our Clean Energy Program Director. And he was the one that conceived, well, I'm not sure if he conceived of it, but he had the foresight to fund Ken and his colleagues and many others to develop the geothermal report. I just approved it. So at the Mitchell Foundation, we have several programs. One of them is the Clean Energy Program. We also have a subsurface energy program. Not that subsurface energy cannot be clean, as we know with geothermal energy. At the foundation, we take a very broad view about energy. We are agnostic about energy and electrons. We don't have a favorite. We do ask, and we fund research, everyone from Ken Wizian's research to Matt Welch's communications work to Colin Layden's advocacy work. We work with all of these guys. We ask, how do you bring the best knowledge or research into action for decision makers? And this report really represents the best of that work, thanks to everyone here and to Drew's leadership in making that happen. So we look at several factors, water, land, and emissions, including carbon, when we're evaluating whether we want to fund something or not. We don't have an abacus out counting molecules. We are not carbon accountants, as I say. We demand, or we ask that under a growing demand scenario where around the world we need energy security, energy affordability, and we're demanding that energy be as clean as possible. At the Mitchell Foundation, we also take into consideration land impacts and water impacts. And thanks to Drew and others, we have found that geothermal is the answer to many of those challenges. And with the growing challenge, the supply chain on gas turbines, under the growing demand for energy that we anticipate and the shrinking in the gas turbine supply until 2030, we're seeing, even in the last few weeks, a growing need for geothermal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's fantastic. Ken, I'd like to kick it over to you since you were the lead author on that study. The Future of Geothermal Energy in Texas is what it's called. Shameless plug, it is parked on the textgia.org website. You can read the executive summary at any time. It's a comprehensive study that was published to launch the future of geothermal across the Lone Star State. Let's discuss some of your key findings, including how much energy and heat geothermal can provide, and how does geothermal and oil and gas get to co-locate together and work together as a partnership versus they versus them, winners or losers? It's more of working together and collaboratively.
Okay, that's a lot of ground. Thank you, Jake. First of all, if you wasn't mentioned, that report on the future of Texas and geothermal, Jamie was the lead author on that. That's a free download. So just Google those terms. It's a great 101 overview of everything. So among other things, and you heard it stated in different ways with the first panel, but there is a lot of resource under our feet. And what it boils down to is in the upper 6 miles, 10 kilometers or so of the crust, there are several thousand times our current energy needs in extractable heat energy. It's a lot. It's a tremendous resource that effectively, if well managed, doesn't run out, because another aspect of it is it's being recharged by the center of the earth, and on total 47 terawatts of heat energy is flowing out from the earth and into space right now. So that's your recharge, even as we draw on it. So there's a tremendous resource. The synergy, I would say, with, for instance, oil and gas industry, as was also mentioned, they're coming around. Almost every major multinational has at least a team formed looking at geothermal. Many of them are backing some of these startups that are really leading the charge, and the startups are leading the charge in this area. They're the ones that are pioneering the technology. A little bit of support from the academic world, but the academic world in this field, very, very small. So yes, you've mentioned the skill set's been mentioned. To add a little bit more to what will probably be brought up in a minute, Texas and the U.S. are perfectly positioned to lead this next world energy revolution, just like we've led earlier energy revolutions. The skill sets here, the knowledge here, the resources here, the friendly business climate, the cooperative regulatory climate, all that comes together. And as was also mentioned, you're starting to see now, with the startups leading the way, landing projects, the bigger companies are steadily getting more and more involved. So it's happening. It'd be nice to accelerate it. And to that extent, I think the C-suites, to some extent, still want to see a little bit more of the proven return on investment.
Yes, I would agree completely. So let's bring this over to Matt Welch with the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance.
Jade, I'm asking for a yes or no question.
I don't think you're going to get one, sorry. So TexGEA helped a lot to get those report findings passed into law in the last legislative session, which we'll hear more about that in the next panel, of course, but we could touch on it a little bit here. What role do you see the oil and gas in helping maybe almost our bullish approach to developing geothermal specifically in Texas?
Yeah, great question. I kind of feel like we're in a geothermal pep rally today, so it's fantastic to see all these smiling faces. If I could just have a quick show of hands, how many people are not from Austin? If you could raise your hands if you're not from Austin. Okay, so that's good. So as a testament to the power and strength and awesomeness of Project Interspace, Jamie did that to me on purpose. That's how awesome. This space used to be a Fogo de Chao restaurant. So hats off to Project Interspace for turning this venue into a phenomenal event. We are in the center of the earth. Another shout out to Project Interspace, because what you all don't know is this traveling exhibit was in Washington, D.C. last week, kind of telling the same story at the federal level. They loaded up the wagon, got to Austin as fast as they could this week. Jamie and her fantastic crew are packing this thing up tonight and heading to Houston for Sierra Week. So as evangelist in chief, Jamie, thank you for leading the way. Probably the perfect segue into demonstrating the synergy between oil and gas and geothermal. I love the opportunity to thank donors when I get it. So Mary Lou You were fantastic, as was Drew, in launching the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. I can categorically say we would not be here without support from the Mitchell Foundation. And when you think about the Mitchell Foundation, Mr. Mitchell was the godfather of fracking. So it is the perfect journey from oil and gas technology to creating a new geothermal entity. And I would say the sky's the limit in Texas. I had a reporter ask me a couple weeks ago, is geothermal in competition with oil and gas? And if you advance geothermal, are you going to put oil and gas out of business? And when I stopped laughing at that question, which was, I thought, ridiculous, I thought she needed to understand that it's not an either or, it's an and equation. Oil and gas and geothermal coexist. The intellectual think tankness, I don't know if Cindy Taff earlier mentioned, but she had a 35-year career at Shell Energy, and her colleagues did as well. There are people from Exxon, Weatherford, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, some of them in the room today. So that's a transfer of technology and industry know-how, and that's what it's going to take, is that continuity of knowledge. The technology is very interchangeable. If you can drill for an oil well, you can drill for a water well. So I'll just pause there and tell you, it's an and the two entities of oil and gas and geothermal are very symbiotic.
Thank you. I'd like to pass this over to Colin next with the Environmental Defense Fund. I think it's really important that we do talk about the environmental impact and influence that geothermal will have on our planet going forward. How do you see politics of the oil and gas industry playing a key role in this environmental solution? And what are some ways that we can continue to incubate this and grow this further?
Thanks, Jade. And very happy to be here. And particularly on a panel that's talking about a clean, firm resource that we desperately need. I guess I'll start by saying something maybe a little counterintuitive, which is I don't actually think the politics for oil and gas has changed all that much, despite a new administration. And that's because, drill baby drill is a good slogan if you don't take into account the price of oil and gas, which is the main driver for the development of oil and gas. And energy independence, we've been a net exporter of hydrocarbons in the U.S. now for more than a few years. So when we're talking about energy independence, we really are talking about our own power grid, which of course plays in nicely to the topic of today, which is geothermal. So, I think that at the global level, the oil and gas industry still faces the same pressures that it faced 6 months ago, which is that the global world is looking for hydrocarbons that are have the lowest emissions that they can have. So that certainly includes the work that EDF has done on methane emissions. But point being, there's no transformation in the politics for oil and gas at the global level. As far as the politics with oil and gas in Texas and geothermal, it's been, as Matt pointed out and others, a very receptive audience so far. It's a bipartisan effort to promote geothermal in Texas. Everyone sees the benefits of geothermal. I don't anticipate that changing, and I think that the oil and gas industry so far has played a pretty constructive role in efforts, at least at what we've seen at the Capitol so far on geothermal.
I agree. And to go back to what Mary Lou was saying, that energy is an agnostic thing. We all need it. It's not a partisan piece.
If I can join in on a tangent that relates to this that's brought up multiple times today, the word fracking. One thing I think is important to understand is that the frack creation in this style of geothermal anywhere, in EGS, is of a different nature than oil and gas fracking, in that it's less intense, shorter in duration, smaller in extent. So for instance, one of our other groups at the university runs the seismic network for Texas. We had a dense array around Sage's test well that created and produced a fracture at their test well in South Texas. No observed seismicity. I think that's likely to continue as more test cases or more production is done, but we have to prove it to the public. But our data on the drilling went straight to our public website. But it's important to understand we really need a new word. So if anyone else has a better wording for fracking, please see me afterwards.
Jade, if I could add on to the bipartisan nature. So General Vision's exactly right. We're getting more inquiries from across the board about what is this induced seismicity. For those outside of Texas that are here, we have a couple of little minor earthquakes from time to time. People say, is that going to be a problem for geothermal? Ken assures me absolutely it's not, so I'm going with it. He's the one who has 3 or 4 degrees with all these alphabet soup behind his name. But we are enjoying a rare moment of bipartisan unity on geothermal. It is unlike any other energy resource. The nuclear industry has its detractors, certainly wind and solar, but it's amazing to see bipartisan support come together for geothermal. We're in the right place at the right time. We're striking while the iron's hot in terms of policy advancements, both at the state level and the federal level. I forgot to add, by the way, that's the problem with going third in a conference and third as a speaker. Everybody steals your thunder and uses your anecdotes, so I have to look on my piece of paper for what I could say now. But when this effort was in DC last week at a MAGMA event, we were fortunate to have the Secretary of Energy on his way to the State of the Union or whatever it's called. He stopped by this event and spoke to us, and it was a phenomenal realization that geothermal has arrived, not only because President Trump referenced geothermal in some of his executive orders, but Secretary Wright himself, through his old oil and gas company, Liberty Energy, or Liberty Oil and Gas, is a $10 million investor in Fervo Energy, a geothermal startup. I think that's a wonderful example of the embracement from the right and kind of the traditional conservative audiences of geothermal. You're going to hear a panel later today. Chairman Barry Smitherman, the chairman of TexGea, has as his guest I call him a hero. State Representative Drew Darby is going to come talk about what we've done and what's next. But I think you'll enjoy the remarkable perspective he has as a rural West Texas, very conservative legislator, being the champion for geothermal in Texas, not only just now, but will be in the future. So I would encourage you all to stick around and stay tuned for that discussion.
Thank you so much. That is such a great segue into my next topic. And I'm a proud Air Force veteran that served enlisted, so sometimes I get a little nervous sitting next to a general that I'm going to ask a lot of questions to. I used to avoid the brass, and now I get to talk to it a lot. General, we have 5 military installations currently in Texas that have an active pilot project on that. Why do you think that is? What encouraged the DoD to put these projects here in Texas and in other states, of course, but let's focus on the Lone Star State with that.
Okay, yes. So I don't think it was mentioned before, but in a previous life, I was also an Air Force Major General. So as a base commander, I understand the value of unbreakable energy, which is what I call geothermal when it's done on site. Geothermal energy can solve a major systemic problem that the military has, and that is dependence on civilian power grids, which have been shown to be rather vulnerable at times due to natural causes or man-made causes. So starting a few years ago, multiple people started pushing the Department of Defense to look hard at geothermal because of what it could do, and they got the message. And starting about a year and a half, 2 years ago, the Department of Defense jumped in with both feet into the geothermal world with the largest single call for new power plant proposals in the history of the world. And they're now proceeding down those tracks. So as mentioned by Jade, 5 bases in Texas alone, plus another at least 5 around the rest of the country, have launched or completed the feasibility study stage of looking at what's the resource. What's the resource under the base? And that's something I forgot to mention. Why is it so good to the military? Well, you can drill and do your geothermal where you want it. That's the anywhere in geothermal anywhere idea. So if you've got a base you want to power and make it unbreakable, drill right in the base as long as it's in a reasonable area. In Texas, that's generally a broad region of East Texas and the Gulf, plus far west Texas. So you have bases like Ellington Field on the south side of Houston, Fort Bliss and El Paso, others around the state. Having been a base commander, it's great. Have the well, have the generation right there. You can protect it, you can guard it. There's no supply lines, no refueling. And also, here's one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far. The biggest competitor for that reliability is nuclear. And the military is looking at putting small modular reactors on bases. But having been a base commander, my first thought is, well, okay, I like the power, but if you put a reactor on my base, that's now the number one target on my base. I like geothermal. It's, even if you manage to break it in some way, it's not going to, pollute the area for all the way around. So where we are now is the military is still charging ahead. They recently closed a solicitation for essentially requests for qualification for companies to present their credentials and be authorized to go direct to other parts of the military anywhere in the world and get a contract going for a geothermal system. And we can go into more detail on that if you want. But to wrap up this part, the Air Force, which is kind of the leader within the Department of Defense in this area, the Secretary of the Air Force's Office of Energy Assurance rates geothermal power as the number one new energy prospect, even above small modular reactors. So they are all in on this, and from a business point of view, the scale-up potential is tremendous. The first people to complete and turn on a base are going to have hundreds of facilities around the country knocking on their door. And last comment, everything I'm saying about military base would also apply to any critical infrastructure. You want your hospital to have uninterrupted power, drill right there. University campus, not as critical, but any critical infrastructure can benefit from this technology of drilling and powering it even behind the meter and skip that extra regulatory step too.
Thank you. Mary Lou, I want to kick this over to you because I know that you've done some great work with your Permian Energy Development lab. And so I would just like to understand more of how geothermal can interact with some ways that the foundation is doing that great work out in the Permian.
Sure. I want to comment a little bit on Matt's comment on Secretary Wright. So I'm a member of the National Petroleum Council, who are a group of about 200 people appointed by secretaries of energy to advise them on mostly petroleum-oriented topics. But Christopher Wright is a fan of geothermal, but just to demonstrate the sort of universal appreciation of geothermal is that the immediate past secretary, Jennifer Granholm, it was her favorite type of energy. She just was constrained by talking about it by the administration that she worked for and her stakeholders. So it's easier to talk about geothermal in the current situation, but it has universal appeal across parties when they're at liberty to talk about it. The Permian Energy Development Lab has been incubated by the Mitchell Foundation for the past several years. And really what Ken said about Texas being it's called different things, the energy capital of the world, or the place where the technology, finance, and expertise and the resource exists unlike any other place in the world, which has been substantiated by the Bureau of Economic Geology. And in particular, the Permian Basin is the most energy-intensive place in the world. Between oil and gas and renewables, just those alone, acre for acre, mile for mile, you get more energy out of the Permian Basin than anywhere else in the world. When you think about Texas, though, Houston is often called the energy capital of the world, and I like to go down there and poke them in the eye and say, you're actually not, because you don't produce any energy. You refine it and ship the heck out of it, but for the Permian Basin, you wouldn't have anything to do. But of course, without the Houston Ship Channel and the refining areas, the Permian wouldn't have anything to do with its oil and gas. So when you think about it's a large geography, but it's 450 miles. But within that sort of oblong oval from the Permian, which is southeast New Mexico and West Texas for out-of-state folks, to Houston and Corpus Christi as well, the liquefied natural gas exports there, you have the entire supply chain of all of energy within that geography. If you can think about that oval as a system, and you think about materials and gases moving around in a circular sort of closed loop system where produced water, which is a big problem in the Permian Basin oil and gas development, becomes an input to production because it's also a semi-arid area that is desperate for water, but they make a tremendous amount of it through oil and gas. It's just not usable, but there are technologies and ways, thanks to EDF and others and some companies, there are ways to treat that water. It becomes an input to production, say, into a hydrogen system, and you can make fertilizer. Anyway, the ammonia, you can make fertilizer out of it. You don't have to just use it for instance, transportation fuel. There are a number of end products for hydrogen and ammonia. When you think about that closed loop system from the Permian Basin to Houston and Corpus Christi, and you start thinking beyond your religiosity around energy and molecules and electrons, and you set your mind free to think broadly enough, you begin to see this picture where you solve multiple environmental and social problems at the same time while you're creating value for people here and all over the world who need this energy. They need it to be affordable and secure. We can do that in Texas unlike anywhere else in the world, and we're starting in the Permian Basin, which has the resources from the oil and gas, it's not super hot rock, but I don't think we're talking about super hot rocks here, geothermal. It has more carbon capture or more carbon storage capacity than anywhere else in the world. They have water problem, but they have produced water that could be a resource. You can produce hydrogen there. You have more wind and solar than anywhere else. All of these things can be connected through a microgrid, which we're out in the field right now trying to get financing for. So PEDAL, Permian Energy Development Lab, is a nonprofit organization we set up. We're developing with some financiers a $28 million microgrid owned by the nonprofit. That microgrid is powered by renewable solar, recycled solar panels and recycled wind turbine blades manufactured right there or remanufactured right there in the Permian Basin. They're installed on an area of land that we've been provided through Roosevelt Resources, which is an oil and gas developer out there, Franklin Roosevelt's grandson. We're building a $28 million 10 megawatt microgrid powered with recycled renewables, I call it. Those electrons are sold to Roosevelt Resources to electrify their field operations. Siemens Energy is building a small modular DAC, those direct air capture of carbon. Those carbon molecules are being sold to Roosevelt. They're using those carbon molecules to do enhanced oil recovery with carbon capture and sequestration, which there are still federal financial incentives to do. That oil and gas is it's been substantiated by people, scientists, that this is net negative in terms of carbon emissions, oil and gas. That oil and gas is sold. Those electrons that we're selling to Roosevelt Resources, those revenues go into PEDAL's nonprofit activities of workforce development and economic development in the Permian Basin. I'm from Midland, Texas, which is the one of the major cities in the Permian Basin. I don't know if any of you all have ever been out there. It is a place that is subject to extreme boom and bust due to the geopolitical nature of oil and gas. Half the people don't graduate high school. 30% of them grade at a fifth grade level. It is not the seat of. It's not a place that attracts the best and brightest coming out of college. The engineers and folks. 30,000 people a week commute in and out of Midland from Houston and Dallas. So they live in Houston and Dallas on the weekends with their families, and they go out to Midland and Odessa and the surrounding area to work Monday through Friday. So they don't invest, they don't have long-term plans in the area, they don't vote, they don't vote for school bond issues. So all of the Permian Energy Development's lab mission is to take advantage and leverage the best of these energy resources and deliver them in an affordable way that solves multiple complex problems at the same time while benefiting the communities in the area and training a workforce, not for the oil and gas industry, they don't need our help, but a next generation energy workforce that will be able to work on complex energy systems that is lacking today.
That's impressive, truly. Thank you. We're so excited. That inspires me to bring it back over to Ken with the Presidio County Economic Development Region, and I think that's kind of a great test pilot to go forward and see what else can be feasible as we develop geothermal, and maybe you can speak on that for a few moments.
Okay, sure. So Presidio County, for those that aren't familiar, and Texas has a lot of counties, I don't know them all by memory myself, but Presidio County is a pie-shaped wedge west of Big Bend National Park out in far west Texas. It goes from Marfa, which a lot of people have heard of, down into a broad area along the Rio Grande River and the Mexican border. It's a large county with very low population. So 10,000 square kilometers, 6,000 people. It's half the population density of Australia. It's a rural area. They don't have the knowledge base to know what their resource is. We teamed up with them, funds partially provided by the Presidio Municipal Development District, and we threw in funds from the state of Texas that are for developing energy resources, and did a deep dive on the county, its resource, and its potential. This fits in with their strategic development plan, which sees good energy baseload as being a foundation of economic development, of redevelopment of the county. They are, by the way, literally at the end of the line. They're at the end of the Texas grid. So anything upstream goes bad, they lose power. They really would like to see indigenous power generation. When we did a detailed look at the county, what we found is they're sitting on a lot of heat, some of the best heat east of the Rockies. They have tremendous potential to develop. We also then, from after looking at the heat, ran techno-economic models. So using a variety of scenarios, if you use EGS technology or AGS technology at this temperature target or that temperature target, what are the 30-year economics of generating power? And we showed that, you can make a profit there doing that. But we also looked at the direct use, which has been mentioned. So, for instance, they've got a new railroad bridge coming across the river from Mexico. They're actually bottlenecked in how much produce and meat and such they can bring into the country due to lack of chilled warehouses, drying facilities, and such. So they've got an immediate demand for cooling and heating. What our techno-economic model shows, you could probably actually make more profit supplying that direct use heat for agricultural use there than even electricity use. Don't forget though, you could stage them. You can generate your electricity first, and then the waste heat off generating electricity, which is still high, can be used for the other process. So you can fold revenue streams together on these projects. So we showed, yeah, you can do it there. And the intent of this study was to provide two things. One, provide the local officials with a base load of knowledge so that they could understand when someone makes a proposal to them, is this reasonable or not? And then also providing that first level kind of foundation reconnaissance level of information that would in turn allow companies to go, oh yeah, that looks like an interesting prospect. Let's look into it deeper. And so I'm happy to say there is an Austin-based company, Exceed, another one of the startups, that is putting together a proposal project for generating geothermal power in Presidio County. So I think that's a big win and a model for what can be carried on elsewhere around the country and around the world. Rural areas, island communities, areas that don't have, like the big cities, the clout or the knowledge base to understand what they've got. So I really am excited about that. I think that can be exported elsewhere. You know, whether it's providing power for the community or, you know, maybe server farms out there. Cheap land, low cost energy, it's a potential win-win.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic, and I'm excited to see what's going to come next. Colin, I'd like to move this over to you next. With the Environmental Defense Fund, where are some areas of improvement or enhancement that we could make working collaboratively throughout this legislative session and with the current presidential administration?
Well, I mean, I think certainly geothermal would be one of the bright spots. You know, I think I just want to take a quick moment to talk about sort of the clean energy picture in Texas, because I think there's probably a lot of people that they think of Texas and they have one thing in their mind, which is oil and gas, and that's absolutely a big part of this state. But what we've done in clean energy in this state is absolutely phenomenal. And I'll just give you some quick stats to illustrate this. In 2019, we had under 4,000 megawatts of solar power, utility scale solar in the state. We now have, in 4 or 5 years, 30,000 megawatts. Just this past spring, I think we can say we're in spring here in Texas. We had 2 or 3 days where in multiple hours during the day, 85% of the power generated on our power grid was carbon free. And the governor himself in his State of the State talked about, since Winter Storm Uri, which was the big storm that made us all lose power, we've added 35% power capacity to our grid. What he didn't mention was 85% of that has been solar and batteries. So what's happened on clean energy in the state is enormous, and now we're turning the conversation to you know, dispatchable 24-hour power, which is what geothermal is, and what are the opportunities in the state for that. And certainly natural gas is going to play a part in that, but geothermal has a huge opportunity right now as we look to, you know, increasing our load, meaning our demand. How are we going to meet that? Renewables is going to continue to play an important role on that, but you know, we need clean firm, and geothermal is going to play into that in a big way, I think.
Matt, please.
Sorry. Colin just perfectly teed up what everybody's new motto in this room will be going forward. We are for all of the above and below because of geothermal. So anytime you hear somebody say all of the above, or you say, what about geothermal? So they will now add all of the above and below to the equation. It's those little things that you throw out there that get the public involved in this very exciting ecosphere that we're in. And we have all the scientists, we have all the engineers, we have all the companies, startups. But when you bring the general public along on this journey, it's phenomenal when the public embraces it. One last point I'll add. 2 years ago, the Hobby Center for Public Affairs at the University of Houston did some statewide polling on various energy sources, and thankfully, geothermal came out at number 2, just behind solar, and 62% of Republicans statewide said that they want to see more of geothermal energy, 59% of Democrats. So that's a snapshot of the bipartisan approach to geothermal energy.
It's the MAGA to MAGMA, if
Exactly.
you will. If you will.
If I can add a little bit more, the wind and solar batteries have been brought up a few times, and Cindy Taff at Sage mentioned, I think, their current commercial projects that involve energy storage version of geothermal. just to plant this seed in the back of your mind, the potential there is also huge besides direct energy production. So we're the country's leading producer of wind energy, but of course it's intermittent. Energy storage with geothermal offers the possibility of converting that into base load, of making it 24/7, dumping the excess power that at times is priced at zero into the ground, bringing it back out when you need it, and or addressing the daily variations in demand on the electricity usage. But the scale-up potential is huge, and it's potentially a lot more friendly than massive lithium battery banks. So one of my grand visions would be essentially an energy storage well next to every wind generator in West Texas, and suddenly we would have a lot more energy when we want it. So there's tremendous potential there.
Fantastic. So we have just a few moments left. I'd like to give each of my panelists a quick time to give some hot takes. Maybe give us a pun or two for geothermal, but hot takes. We'd love to hear them. Final thoughts. Let's roll.
I'll go first. We made history in Texas this month. You're going to hear a podcast by Doug Lewin. He's the Farmer's Almanac of historic breakthroughs. Every time we break a record, Doug lets us know, and I think we broke 3 records on renewable energy on the grid last week. But we made history on geothermal earlier this month. And that is, for the first time ever, the Texas Railroad Commission, the regulator for the geothermal industry, issued a permit to Sage Geosystems for their Christine, Texas project, about an hour and a half outside of San Antonio. Remarkable. They're first on the map, and there's more coming behind them. So stay tuned for a much brighter, deeper drill down on geothermal.
I guess my hot take is, so right now in the race for clean firm, you have 3 options. You have nuclear power, you have natural gas with carbon capture and storage, and you have advanced geothermal. And it's really a race to deployment and who's going to win that race. And I'm going to predict that advanced geothermal is going to win that race.
Woo!
I don't really have a hot take moment, but I will say what I often say that people sort of enjoy thinking about energy transition. You hear that a lot. It's become politicized. I like to remind people that we are a innovative and sort of wily species, and ever since the first person decided to throw wood on a fire instead of animal dung, energy decarbonization started, and we have decarbonized and transitioned ever since then, from wood to coal, coal to oil, oil to natural gas from shale development with Mr. Mitchell and DOE, which is now innovating that some of those technologies, as you heard all day, creating the geothermal boom, if you will. Perhaps I like to say that renewable energy is a transition fuel. It's not the end story. And eventually hydrogen, and then, who knows, all the other things that are still kind of pipe dreams and just concepts at this point. But geothermal, the bipartisan nature of it, the extension of primarily existing technology, to me spells a great deal of success for it moving forward.
Okay. Let's see. A factoid, a perspective, and a comment real quick. So factoid, Austin Energy has signed a 100 megawatt geothermal contract with Exceed. So Austin Energy's into it too. Secondly, we had Cindy Taff and Sage up here. We've talked, and they're focused on the EGS version of geothermal. I will also point out that we have Malcolm Ross from Evor, which is a leader on the AGS side. So if you want perspectives, we've got both sides covered here. Last thing is, I've been in geothermal before it was cool. Is that a reverse pun?
It's a reverse pun.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's good.
So I got into geothermal in the early 90s doing my PhD work, The last few years are, by orders of magnitude, the most exciting time in my career for geothermal energy. It's just tremendous.
Thank you. Panel's been wonderful. We appreciate you all as an audience, and thank you all so much.